I'm here with Kristin Ward, who is an amazing storyteller, artist, belly dancer, performer, and also works in the theater arts department at Carnegie Mellon University. I have had the great pleasure of working with Kristin and getting to know her over the last couple years on some collaborative projects while we were working on these projects together.
Thanks, Anjali. My name is Kristin Ward. I've been a storyteller in the Pittsburgh area since 2008, but I have a theater background as well as that. I think I discovered theater in high school, so it's been a long time. And before that, even, I was always interested in stories, especially folklore. A lot of kids grew up with the Disney movies, Cinderella, Snow White. I grew up being read to, and particularly this, if you're listening on the phone, it's a red book with gold lettering, and it says the world's best fairy tales, and it's a Reader's Digest version, and it has everything from Grimm to abridged Arabian Nights tales and Hans Christian Andersen, and I loved these stories growing up. Fast forward a while, and in the early 2000s, I was doing a lot of belly dance in Pittsburgh, and the stories were sort of a way to unite my belly dance with my theatrical roots. So I started telling a lot of Arabian Nights tales and Turkish folk tales that were infused with the dance that I was doing. And after a while, I started to think about what would my cultural stories be. I'm adopted, and like most European Americans, I don't have any specific connection to any roots. So for me, stories are a little bit about trying to unite in a way with those who have gone before me, whether biological or my adoptive family, growing up hearing stories and hearing my grandfather tell stories. And then I started thinking about what my story would be, and how I could find ways to explore my own identity through storytelling. So one of the first things I started doing was a collaborative piece called Many Voices, One Story, which you were a part of, and it brought together different versions of Cinderella throughout the world. And for me, it was a way of exploring that feminine story of wish and toil and transformation, and finally finding what you want or what your glory is. And it's a story that I really related to when I was a kid. I think pretty much anybody who is awkward and shy as a kid can relate to just sort of daydreaming that, you know, one day there's going to be a fairy godmother that shows up, and she's going to wave her wand, and I'm going to be beautiful, and people will like me. And so as I grew older, my relationship with that story started to change a little bit. And this collaboration really gave me a chance to explore what the roots of the story meant and how storytelling could offer ways of transformation that weren't just a magical thing happens and suddenly everything is okay. Transformations that were more internal. So I got to work with 4 different women who told the Italian version of the tale, which is probably pretty close to the Disney version, even though they're using the French tale. There are a lot of similarities. And then a West African version where there is no prince. She is able to go out and find her riches without any masculine help. It's all about her own willpower and her own center and kindness. And then we have the tale of Shakuntala, which is a little bit like a reverse Cinderella story. She falls in love first, and then he forgets her. And so the journey is finding herself and finding her center, and then because of that, being able to reunite, and be in love in a more true way, in a more lasting way. And then the last tale was a tale from the Czech Republic that was really interesting. There's a lot of paranormal folklore and darker folklore in Eastern Europe, which is why we know a little bit about the darkness of the Grimms. In this version, she actually dies, and he has to bring her back to life. So those were the 4 original tales. And then later on, I added my own tale after a bunch of research called Tattercoats. And Tattercoats is the British version of the story. And I really related to it because first of all, it's about grief. So the main male character, her grandfather, is so sorrowful that her mother died at childbirth that he just sort of closes himself off and forgets everything, and she ends up neglected. She befriends a goose herd, and through music and dance, she finds healing in a friend, and it's something that they're able to share together, so that when she gets the call to the feast, the goose herd convinces her through his music that they can go just as they are. And so they go dancing down the road, and the prince comes riding by and ends up joining them for a while and really starting to like the conversation and the dancing and the music, so that he actually falls in love with her just as she is. So no dress, no glass slippers, no magic, just her. And to prove his love, he invites her to the feast as his special guest. And when she walks in, he actually stands up and honors her. So he is true to his word. And they end up together by the end, because she has found a courage in herself, and he has proved his faithfulness. So there's definitely an equality there that comes between them because of what they can offer each other, and because they're both centered in their own selves as well.
As you're describing the stories, what is your main aim in doing this and expressing these stories and working with the women that you have worked with?
When I first started it, it was a way for me to bring together women of different backgrounds and have a way to celebrate our similarities as well as our differences. Because when this was performed, and we performed it a few different places, at the Pittsburgh Fringe Festival, at Women's Center and Shelter, and at a house of women recovering from addiction. Within these tales, there is something that everyone can relate to. Seeing that alongside the differences within the tales, and being able to acknowledge the different cultures, such as in the Tale of Shakuntala, we talk about the Navratri festival. So having that kind of gives us more of an appreciation for each other.
You know, the theme is of toil, you know, the suffering that all of the women go through. There is, through a series of events, a transformation that occurs. And just that sort of theme, those themes of suffering, transformation, and hope, is something I think that everyone can relate to. At least people who have tried in life.
Yes.
And then I think it was so great to have a chance to be creative with you, because in the traditional story, Shakuntala, there is no Navratri festival in the story of Shakuntala. But it was something that was personal to me and my culture, and so we added that in there. And you did that, I felt like, very seamlessly and artistically. It didn't seem like it was just put in there, you know. It became part of it, and then that also brought in the main theme, because the Navratri festival celebrates the goddess Durga, and Durga, through so much toil, fights evil, and she fights suffering, really, and becomes very powerful from that. So that allowed me also to express my voice, I felt.
Yeah, that's part of the beauty of working with stories. They're rooted in oral tradition, so we're actually supposed to have each storyteller add their own experience and their own beliefs into the story. So I found a great quote by Maria Tater. She's a fantastic reference for studying folklore. And it's, when it comes to folk tales, there is no original text, only an infinite number of variants, each anchored in a specific time and place. So that when we're working with folklore, it's actually really important to think about how we can relate to it ourselves rather than just telling it word for word from a book that we found. Especially since right now a lot of our stories that were written down, that we know them as, well, that's what Cinderella is, or that's what Snow White is. It was actually written down in the 19th century, which really doesn't mesh with our views today, in our cultures today. So for me, especially working with women of different backgrounds, I wanted to honor their experiences as well within the text. And you mentioned what we did with the Navratri festival. I also made a few changes as we went with the West African tale of Chinya, because when we got all of the stories together, some of the elements in the West African tale, while as a tale unto itself were totally innocuous, just didn't look right next to especially the European tales. So it was brought to my attention, hey, you know, why is the African Cinderella just a farmer where everybody else is a princess or a duchess or a high-end merchant? And why are we showing this one that stands out as a different class? So we made small edits, and also adding into that tale at least a bit of a reconciliation at the end. At the end of some of the tales, the fathers or the abusers will have a moment of reconciliation and sorrow. So my performer who was telling that tale thought that was very important for her because of current negative stereotypes that are put on African American fathers today.
I love that quote that you said about how there's really no starting point and that things evolve. They're always changing. Mm-hmm. I love that it's not set into stone. And that we should keep it more current and modern.
Mm-hmm. Fairy tales have an interesting history because in the beginning they really were for adults, and they were told, alongside when people were working or at tables at night by the fires, and it was a way for them to cope with and escape from their daily struggles, which is, I feel, now that we're right now in a crisis with the COVID-19, it's especially important to be able to connect with each other and tell our stories. So what happened with our folklore and how it began to be perceived as for children is that somewhere in the 19th century, people started printing these little chapbooks, and it was written down in a very simplified way, not just for children, but because the general populace at the time was just beginning to be literate, but it wasn't at a high level yet. So a lot of the stories were very simple, and then they started to be marketed for children, a little bit because of Puritanism. The culture was, if this isn't teaching someone morals, then it's a waste of time. So that's when people started to sort of strip down some of the stories and add morals. A lot of the objectionable elements in the original tales were stripped out, and they were starting to be put together, and so like the Grimm's book for children and that sort of thing, where and the original Grimm's can be very heavy on, if you're a bad person, then you're going to fall into a tar pit and an evil witch is going to turn you into a frog, and then birds are going to eat your eyes. There are very harsh punishments for acting up in the Grimm's fairy tale world. So as we move forward into modern day, our stories just kind of got stuck because they were written down. So that's what it was, or they were Disneyfied. So there's sort of two totally different ways to go, where Grimm wanted to show, moral and punishment, and Disney wanted to show, dancing animals, and keep it very light and colorful because of the dawn of animation. And you still see a little bit of those old morals in those first Disney movies as well, with Snow White being perfectly happy to move into the dwarf's house and do all their housework and be helpless and wait for a prince to come, that sort of thing.
So how is it shifting now? What are the stories telling now? Because in your story, the way that you are writing it's not moral focused. To me, it seems
right.
more about the experience, and is that what you want? And then out of that, people are watching the story or telling the stories. We do get the similarity of the experiences and the themes, and thus fulfilling your aim of finding the similarities between the cultures or even the sexes, if possible, because there's been male viewers in our audience too.
Right.
It's not just for females.
And that's one reason I've tried to be very fair to the male characters as well in the stories. It's we're definitely leaning towards feminist folklore with the Cinderella tales, but I didn't want it to be just, oh, men are bad, men are terrible, look how terrible men are, because that still goes back to just, I don't know, creating a morality or a statement that's just not malleable. And there's a local storyteller in Pittsburgh, Bara Jacob McDowell. She is a harpist and a lovely woman, and she tells Scottish and Celtic folk tales. And she did a presentation at the Carnegie Library talking about wisdom tales. She talked about how the stories that in the past were just forced morals on can really start to be thought of more as wisdom tales, because they all have something in it that means something to us, but it's not really the storyteller's place to say, this is what it means. I like to think of it as a little bit like runes or tarot cards, where it's not what is, it's an oracle. It's something to listen to that can help you gain direction and your own meaning. And it's going to mean something completely different to from teller to listener to other listener. Two people might be sitting right next to each other hearing the same story and get something completely different out of it. Some of the best wisdom tales are the Middle Eastern and Turkish Nasruddin tales, Nasruddin or Nasruddin, depending on pronunciation. I've heard it pronounced both ways. So tales like that, the shortest one I can think of is that Nasruddin has this beautiful new coat that he just gets at the marketplace. And he puts it on, and a friend, he's out and about, and a friend sees him and says, Nasruddin, you look so great. Why don't you come to my party tonight? And Nasruddin comes to the party, but he doesn't want to show off, because he's not sure who will be there. He doesn't want to just be ostentatious with his new coat. So he leaves it at home, and he wears his own coat. So the friend, when he gets there, says, "Oh, where's your coat?" And is very disappointed and doesn't really talk to him much. And so Nasruddin excuses himself from the party, and he goes home and he gets his brand new coat, and he goes back to the party, and oh, you have your beautiful new coat. Oh, you look so wonderful. And so Nasruddin sits down, and when he's served soup, he takes his ladle and he just very slowly starts pouring the soup into the pockets of his coat. And his friend says, "Nasruddin, what are you doing?" And Nasruddin says, well, it was very clear to me that it was my coat who was invited and not me. And so I am making sure that it gets its share.
Have you ever performed any of the Turkish tales or the Middle Eastern, these Nasruddin tales?
It's the first Maquette Volante shows. I did a Nasruddin tale called The Ass, and it's one where he's got his donkey in the marketplace, so that kind of ass. Thieves take it away, and the one thief, because Nasruddin is well known for being foolish, so he's kind of a wise fool. It's a little bit like American Jack tales. And so the thief switches place with the donkey and says, "Oh yeah, I was your donkey, and I repented from a witch's curse, and now here I am in my true form." And so Nasruddin lets him go, but later on sees his old donkey because they tricked him and they just hit it. And he says to the donkey, "Ah, I see you have not repented after all. Don't think I'm going to let you go a second time."
Right, right.
So we did that with live music. So with live music, we were able to add not just fun dance, but also little like the click-clock noises of the drum, of the hoofs of the donkey, and things like that interwoven through.
Nasruddin is a male, correct?
Mm-hmm.
The stories are all from his perspective?
Yes.
Are there any interactions with females, or are there any roles that females play in those tales?
Not in the Nasruddin tales. It would be interesting to explore what the feminine version of that would be. And I think maybe the closest would be Baba Yaga. But she also transforms through the tales as well, and sometimes she's very helpful and guiding. And so she's sort of a wild woman archetype. Unfortunately, I just haven't studied her enough to be able to really explain her.
I work with these goddess oracles, and Baba Yaga is in there.
Mm-hmm.
And she is like a very free, naughty spirit.
Yes.
And she's on like a broom.
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of like flies around. So the meaning of it in the goddess oracles is to like use that fun, naughty, lighthearted side of you. Be inspired to do things. But yeah, I know there's like a lot of different versions in I think the Eastern European tales. They have different meanings for her there.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about males, as we were talking, is like it's not like they also don't go through some sort of suffering in the tale.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not like they're just shown as these like arrogant guys. Because in Shakuntala, he forgets about her, but he clearly suffers because of that.
Mm-hmm.
He's depressed for a long time, for years. You know, until when they finally meet, he has his epiphanies, and then, you know, they're together again. Because of this curse that the sage had put on both Shakuntala and Dushyant, the king, him who suffered, he suffered because of that. So it's like both sides had some wisdom to develop.
Yes.
Yeah. And have you noticed like a similar thing with males in any of the other stories?
It depends, and it also depends on versions and where things are coming out of. I actually engineered the tale of Tattercoats a little bit because in the original version, her grandfather or her father is in grief and he just sort of neglects her and just sits at his window, closed off from the world. But for some reason, and this is in a version by Jacobs, so it was probably early 1900s, he snaps out of it when the king announces a feast. And he's in grief for all these years, and he doesn't recognize his own daughter or granddaughter. But, oh, cool, there's a party to go to. And that just didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like character development. It kind of just made him look like a big, shallow jerk. And so I wanted to show a transformation for him as well. So I bring it full circle at the end where he's able to hear the music that helped Tattercoats heal. And through that, he actually finally processes his grief and allows himself to feel it, so then he can move forward and reconcile with his child. But there are also versions of Shakuntala where the king doesn't really have remorse. He just kind of gets excused because of the curse, and he's like, oh well.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at, there's a great online article about the tale, that's in the resources page. There's a old Indian play called The Recognition of Shakuntala that has sort of that version in it.
How do you choose which version you want to kind of evolve from, or do you take it all in and then go from there?
I take in multiple versions. I would say if you're going to do a project like this, at least 3 different versions, but I know with some of them I've worked through more. If you work through various versions, you can start to see some of the patterns, some of the things that are really important to the tale, and some of the things that individual storytellers or individual cultures of the times might have inserted. And then through that, you can start to think, what about this tale means something to me, and how can I bump it up? How can I give that more power? When I was working with Tattercoats, for instance, the thing that I really related to was that fear of, I'm trying to go, I'm trying to transform myself, but how are people going to like me like this? That's sort of rooted in imposter syndrome that a lot of us face. Like, they're just going to know that I'm a goose girl, or, they're just going to see my tattered dress and my bare feet. When I was working with that, I wanted something internal that could be transformative for her, and something that her guide, her goose herd, could help her with, but still leave it in her power. I used his voice to say something that I would have wanted someone to tell me or to tell myself. And that was, my dear Elvina, I have watched you grow from a forgotten child to the woman you are now. I have seen your compassion, even when others did not offer it to you. I have seen you ragged and tired and cold, and yet come to me and dance. The music I gave you was my power, but the magic it brought you was your own.
I see you perform Elvina. It really brings like a light to you. I can see your happiness.
Oh.
Yeah, especially like when you're dancing too. She danced every time you say that. I mean, it's just so apparent. It's so interesting because in modern times, we put so much emphasis on beauty. There's like this obsession with it. And, we're talking about Elvina in her Tattercoats.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like this just deep feeling of like a poverty almost. I don't know how to explain it. Like the whole story to me against this really superficial environment. I just can really feel that contrast. And then the heartache for her, almost like, that she's not pretty and she's not beautiful, even though, to me, she's incredibly beautiful.
And it's really interesting when put next to the tale of Chinya and the tale of Shakuntala, that when you really start to think about it, all 3 of those tales are really about finding your own love for yourself, and then maybe being able to share it with others.
Mm-hmm. There is so much through, I don't know if it's because of the patriarchal conditioning or times or what, it's like beauty equates with love.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the stories and expressions are always trying to rise above that equation, or that, that you don't have to be beautiful, you're beautiful inside. To me, it's kind of like, yeah, beauty can inspire love, but it's also beyond that. It really bothers me that, oh, she was so beautiful, he fell in love with her.
Right.
It's just
that
like,
very superficial, like, and that's her only quality.
And oh, suddenly she has all this worth.
Mhm.
And I think that is basically what we women are trying to get out of, desperately. And the man that Alvina, what was his name? The guy that fell in love with her?
I don't think I ever gave.
You didn't give him a name, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So what was it that he saw, felt for Alvina, etc.? What do you think made him fall in love with her?
I think in the story, I think I mentioned something about their talk, her wit, and the way she moved. From the prince's perspective, I can see that he had. Oh, and I think I put it into the tale that the king had tried for a long time to get the prince a bride. So he brought princess after princess to him, and each one was turned away because they were all just very one-dimensional. You know, they were just kind of pretty things in dresses, and they laughed at whatever he said, and flirted, and held their teacups just so, and they looked great on the outside, but they were just kind of boring. It's not like they were lovely, but being married to them would be like, being married to a nice piece of furniture.
Well, she was unique.
I think so. Yeah, Tattercoats she's unique and she's genuine. And she has a genuine concern because of how neglected she was. She understands what it's like to be poor or hungry and cold. And so as a prince looking for someone who would help him rule a kingdom in a fair and giving way, I can see how he would really be attracted to somebody who actually cares about the world around her rather than just, what extra jewels she can get around her neck. It's interesting, too, because as we age, we change, and we have to constantly be finding new ways to find and express our own beauty because that changes.
Mhm. And that's like the evolution.